How loud do I have to talk for you to hear me? How loud do I have to talk for you to hear me?
That's good.
How loud do I have to talk for you? Okay, I can back it down a little. All right, good deal. That was good. Because, just a question of checking. The less I have to shout, the easier it is for me. In principle, I like to just answer questions. And lately, because then I don't have to prepare, right? I say, what questions do you have? You ask questions, I answer them, then we're done, right? And lately, I found it most interesting to answer questions by telling stories. So if I don't have a story, then I can't answer the question. If I want to answer the question, I have to answer the question by telling a story, because stories are very informative in a way that's different than a person's opinion, right? So that's quite interesting. So think about what you want to ask for questions, because that's really where I want to spend the time. Now, in order to give you a little bit of time to think about your questions and so on, I've got some stuff prepared. 2 topics out of 5 that are very important, 5 or 6. So I'll start off by talking to these things. And I'm standing on the side. I'm only blocking a couple of people, I guess. All right? The first is this idea that Agile is for wimps. Now, I don't know in Estonian or Russian what is a wimp. Anybody know what a wimp is?
In Estonian?
Anybody know what it is in English? So
Yes.
Yes, and so what is it in Estonian or Russian?
Argpüks.
Did you hear him?
Argpüks.
You guys understand that?
Yes.
All right, good. So we're going to take a look at that first. The thing starts with this, that when we look at a software development team or any kind of a design team in the larger sense, what we see are people first and foremost. Everything comes back to people. The people are interacting with each other, and they're doing one of 3 things. They're inventing something, they're communicating something, they're deciding something. That's it. That's all there is. That's all they can do with each other. Invent, communicate, and decide. They are solving a problem that they don't yet understand. Why don't they understand it? Well, they just got started. How can they possibly understand it? They just barely got started, right? And the problem keeps changing out from under them while they're working. They're creating a solution that they don't understand. Why don't they understand the solution? Well, they just got started. Of course they don't understand the solution. And guess what? The solution keeps changing out from under them while they're working. Naturally, of course it does. They're expressing their ideas in certain kinds of very limited languages that typically they don't understand, and you won't be too surprised that keeps changing out from under them. They're expressing their ideas to, in the case of computers, in the case of civil engineering, in the case of chemical engineering, to an interpreter that is unforgiving of error. Now, if you take a different design activity, such as business, theater, literature, publication, and so on, the end interpreter is another human that is at least forgiving of error differently than a computer or gravity is, or chemistry. Everybody on the team is making decisions. Every decision has got consequences that ripple out through the organization. And my thingy stopped working. I have a Mac. It's a brand new Mac. I can't make it do anything. Nothing. Let's see if it keeps going now. All right, good. And resources are limited. Okay? So there on one slide I offer to you, without any analogies, metaphors, nothing. That's the problem domain that we live in. And we're trying to figure out how to live in this world. So everything should come back to this. People inventing, communicating, deciding, understanding the problem, understanding the solution, understanding their technology, understanding the consequences of their decisions, and dealing with a finite, resource-limited situation. Okay? So we're going to decompose that. Now that decomposes in at least 5 different sections, which would be a separate, kind of like a 2-hour talk. So I just picked out a couple of pieces out of that. So when I say the word agile, I don't mean like, oh, agile, we wrote it down, so therefore it has to be perfect, la 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 la. What I mean is that this is the world we live in. If you look at agile development, it is a kind of a short form encoding of good strategies that make sense in this little world that we're living in. So look at agile differently as a really short form, effective summary of how to behave in this world. If we look at the manifesto invites this wimpiness that I was referring to. So people look at agile development and they go, well, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, I never liked those processes in the first place. I'm really happy to avoid them. And all this stuff about documentation, well, I never liked documentation in the first place. So I'm really happy to do without documentation. And all this stuff about contracts, man, I love this agile stuff. No contracts, no deadlines. Regarding the change, no project managers, no architect. This is great stuff. I could do this all day, right? Just sign me up, sign me up. How do I get going? So that is unfortunately the loose interpretation of agile. Now the surprising thing for me is that wimpy agile works remarkably well. I mean, really badly implemented agile in the most naive form has done surprisingly well in surprisingly many contexts compared to what we designed it for, in the 90s. So that's good. But it's not really being centered in that first slide that I show you. So we can do better than that. And I'll show you some of the things. So there's the Agile Manifesto, and I won't go over that. What I want to just show you is these are the 5 chapters that I talk about. I talk about personality, self-awareness, cooperative game, flow management, knowledge acquisition, and craft. And I'm going to just skip forward into a couple of these ones because I just want to jump. This is where I want to jump to out of the 2 topics I'm going to pick up. And this is the thing I have to describe in every talk and every class called Shuhari. Has anybody here seen any write-up of Shuhari, just so I understand the people in the class, people in the group? Okay, so most of you have not heard about this. The Shuhari, these characters come from Japan, from Aikido. And it's their codification, and as far as I understand it, this goes back into like the 1600s in Japan. Doesn't matter. They have this codification, but it turns out to apply to every kind of skills acquisition. That people pass through 3 stages. When you enter and you get started, you ask for one way that works, generally works. We call that shoe. Rhymes with shoe, the things on the feet. It's very handy. We can make jokes about shoes. We will make jokes about shoes. But the thing is that you come in and you expect your teacher to show you a technique that works. And then you spend your energy just trying to do the technique. And this doesn't matter if you watch children trying to tie their shoelaces, if you're trying to bake bread for the first time, if you're trying to manage your first project, if you're trying to do whatever. You always start by saying, give me a technique that works. And that's shoe. Now the problem is that people get very comfortable with this technique that's limited. They get trapped in what I call the shoe box. The shoes come in a box, or the shoe box, and people get very comfy in their shoe box and they don't want to leave. Well, eventually you realize that the technique is limited. The technique has limitations. And so you go on to the next stage, which is called Ha. Ha means that you start to collect techniques. So you first learn Scrum, or you first learn XP, or you first learn whatever you first learn. Then after a while you go, that's not working all the time, I need another one. So you learn another one, and then another one, and then another one, and another one. And in this stage you're collecting all these different techniques, and that's good. Eventually, if you keep going, you get to a point that you just understand how to do things. And everything becomes kind of blurred, and your whole body gets involved, and you make little changes every time you do something. Everything is very context specific, and you do exactly this now, and you do exactly something else a little bit later. And that's the last stage, Ri, which means leave. So in Aikido, That's when you're finished learning from the master and you go and you leave the dojo. So Ri means leave. And you leave the dojo and you go out into the world. People who operate in Ri really can't explain stuff to people who are still in the Shu. Because the Shu people expect one technique to work over and over and over again. And the Ri people change everything every time. They just change something because the context is different. It's very important to understand everybody has to learn through Shu. Eventually, you need some people at Ri to handle the global, complicated situations that we deal with in real life. Shu Ri, super duper important. So typically, when people ask me questions, they ask me for a canned, fixed Shu level answer to a Ri level situation. And of course, I can't give an answer because I'm missing all the context that would make something different. I'll give you one small example from this. I was in Nokia some years ago, and they were doing Scrum. They had the UX designers, 2 of them in Helsinki. They had the dev team in Beijing. They said the Beijing people won't make a sprint commitment because the UX people keep making design changes. I said, okay, there's a technique called pipelining, and you cut it into 2-week pieces, and then every 2 weeks, the UX is frozen for 2 weeks. You send that off to Beijing, they build to that. In the meantime, the UX people change it, and then 2 weeks later, there's a change. Okay? They said, yeah, but we sent the UX designers to Beijing. They seem to have no trouble. I said, well, that's completely different. Because when the UX people are in Beijing, then the programmers are talking to them every day. They see the changes coming. They understand the changes. It's not a surprise to them. So you could run full concurrent change without this pipelining stuff when the UX people are in Beijing. You see, this is the same company, the same project, the same people. All we did is move 2 people from Helsinki to Beijing, and we totally changed the process from pipelining to concurrent development. Right? That's an example of Ri. Yeah? So for people like me, anything we write down in a book is already limited because it's limited by the circumstances that it fits, which can't be all circumstances. That's Shu Ri. Now, just for your amusement, I got some pictures just for kind of changing it from slides to pictures. So there's some kid. It's not anybody I know. I just got it from the web. And this is how we teach kids to dive, right? And you hold them over and you bend and da-da-da-da-dee. And they spend however long they spend, many tries doing this before they get to something else. There's the symbol for Shu up there. So this is a picture of going off of in New Zealand. I went to the origin, the home of bungee jumping, and I did a bungee jump. Okay? That's not Shu level stuff. In fact, it's not Ri because it's pretty simple. You know, you have a big rope tied to your feet. It's scary. You know, takes a little bit of something. I get vertigo every time I look at that picture, actually. Okay, so that's Ha, and there's the symbol for Ha. I'll show you the Ri picture that I've got. This is in Nice, a place I love to go. And it's about 8 meters up, and you have to go about 8 meters out. Okay? You get 1 try on this, right? There's none of this Shu stuff. There's none of this Haas. There's no bungee. There's nothing, right? There's no practice. You just like whatever, you go. Okay? So that one would count as Ri, and there's the picture of Ri. And actually, after I did that, I got Ri tattooed on me here, so I'm now Ri something. All right, so that's Shu Ri. I have to do that for every talk because you have to know for everything I say, are you asking a question at Shu? Are you expecting an answer at Shu? Are you asking a question at Ri? Is somebody answering the question at Ri? Shu and Ri are really in contradiction. You need them both, but they really are in contradiction. So that's the Shu Ri part. Okay, everybody should know that. Now we're going to see if I can guess what the heck slide number my next thing is. This is where I want to be right there. Perfect. In the last few years, this has been where my energy has gone. This is the most interesting thing. Because this takes us out of the old-fashioned standard agile that was the 1990s stuff, that was the 2000 stuff, into some really new, interesting areas. So the advice you get from here doesn't look like anything that you got in your Scrum Master class or your beginner Agile book. This is what the best teams are doing these days. So I want to show you that, to show you where the world is now. What I'm dealing with is that thing that I said where we're learning about a problem where we don't know what the problem is and the problem keeps changing, and we don't know what the solution is, and the solution keeps changing, and probably we don't know who our colleagues are that we're working with, and the colleagues maybe keep changing too. All right? So we're dealing with a knowledge problem. So what I've got there is just knowledge going up and time going across, and I just have a cost line as a kind of a reference line going up. Now what happens in a classical waterfall or Big Bang integration or a Big Bang release, which happens even these days, people will do incremental development, but a big release, you have the same problem on the big release, which is you don't actually know what's going to happen. There's a surprise. Surprise equals learning. So the big learning happens at the end. That's really bad news. We have stacked up a lot of questions, a lot of hypotheses, a lot of decisions, and we find out about all of them at one time. Late. Bad. What we're looking for is a way to get the same surprise but in little tiny pieces. If we could get them in little tiny pieces, then we could ask our questions in a different order to learn to expose the risks, if you want to talk about risk management, to learn, and we try to get our learning to go up fast early and do the flattening out later. So we'd like a knowledge acquisition curve that looks like this. And I'll get to the techniques here in just a minute. Okay? To do that, we have to work differently than people have typically worked in the previous however many years. So in a sense, the project has got two parts to it. It's a part where the first emphasis is on getting bad news early, is the way I like to put it. I don't happen to like this phrase, fail early, fail often. I'm interested in just not failing, right? I just want the success. But if you want this as success, then you have to get the bad news early, so you have the maximum amount of time to deal with the bad news. There's 4 categories of bad news we'll look at. But the idea here is it would be nice if after a certain point in the project, we have a very low risk of late bad news, right? So all bad news early is the theme. When I map this against the growth of business value, so the classical standard, 10-year-old literature about Agile says, build the most valuable thing first. Maybe that's a good idea, and maybe that's not a good idea. It has to do with where the risks are and what you need to learn. But typically what I see is people say, yep, we understand this, let's go. Highest business value first, good, let's go for it. And then suddenly there's a surprise. Maybe this new product that you bought doesn't work. The person that you hired isn't so good. There's a scaling problem, testing problem, the market changes, blah, 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 bad things happen. And you say, pause, stop, let's find out about this technology or about this person or about this market or about this whatever you're trying to find out about. And so knowledge keeps going up, but the business value doesn't. So boop, boop. Yep, we got it. That's good. Let's go. No, stop. It's good, right? And then if you do good prioritization, business value goes up and starts flattening off. And then ideally, you can decide when to ship late in the game. And we'll look at that in just a minute. And I just put my water glass down somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good eye. So when I look at projects, I see the business value going a bit like this wobbly stuff over time. So not matching these lovely curve that you see in the books. There are 4 categories of risk in a project, or 4 categories of learning you want to do. The first is, are we building the right thing? I'll tell you it's easy. The answer is no. So you don't have to ask that question anymore. The question you want to ask is, what is the learning? So there's this thing nowadays called Lean Startup, and if you haven't already seen this book, it's an excellent, excellent book. So businesses are applying the Agile style of technique to deciding what product to deliver. And they do this with lots of very small experimental releases to find out what people really want to buy. So they do something and then they measure it and say, well, that didn't seem quite right. Well, the sooner that you do that experiment, the less money you waste when you change direction. So it's really important to get things out early. You need incremental development for this, you need incremental deployment for this, and you need to have measurements on your delivery to do this. So are we building the right thing? How would we come to learn what is a good thing to build? Okay, that's business. Secondly is social. Did we hire the right people? Maybe, maybe not. But in all cases, it takes time for people to learn how to work together. So the question is, how can we arrange events on the project so that people can come to learn to work well together? It's a learning about the people. So for this reason, my favorite strategy, starter strategy I always use, is I always do the simplest thing first, not the most valuable thing first, not the hardest thing first, not the most risky thing first. I do something simple first. Why? Because I want the people to learn how to talk to each other. If we have to do something hard and it fails, is it because I have the wrong people? They don't know how to talk to each other. It's an impossible task. The technology is not ready. I don't know. So let's start by getting a team of people working together. Do something simple. We debug the social protocols a bit, get the people happy with each other, and then we can take on harder things. So I typically go for social learning straight out of the box. The third one is technical. That's the standard stuff. Does this API fit? Does this product fit? How long does it take to load? What's the scaling, performance, all of that sort of stuff. The fourth category was a surprise to me when I was looking at this team working, because they were not doing anything that matched anything in the book literature. What they were doing was very small, narrow implementations of selected features because the assertion was that their old system would naturally migrate to the new requirements for the new system design. They weren't sure that was true, so they wanted to do little implementations. They weren't going to keep them. They wanted to see what the cost would be if it was a small cost. Like, if the old system would in fact handle the new functionality, then the cost is pretty small. They just run and do it. If it was going to break, then they were going to have to figure out how to schedule in the new major revision that would be needed to handle the new functionality. Pretty big differences in what they were going to do based upon this question. So they were doing specific experiments that produced no business value, but it helped them to understand the cost and schedule of what they were going to do. That's nowhere inside the Agile literature, what that is. So that's the fourth categories. When you do this, the nature of the discussions about the project is different. You're talking about small experiments with feedback deliberately to either add a piece of value or add a piece of knowledge. So you're blending value increments with knowledge in these four categories. It's quite an interesting and different discussion. So that's what some of the best teams are doing these days. In this case, so there are kind of like 3 periods in the project. An early period where you're accentuating the knowledge acquisition over the business value. A second period where you're accentuating the business value because ideally the risks are down low. And a third period, which is where the magic happens, where the knowledge is flat because in principle there are no more surprises. Business value is flattening, and now the business can be in charge of deciding to ship earlier or ship later, to work more on this feature or less on this feature, or not on that feature at all. So the first time, business is in control of this fine-grained delivery. The cool thing about this applies to one-person projects, two-person projects, or 1,000-person projects and 2,000-person projects. So this is a strategy, a way of looking at projects that fits all project sizes that I know. On here, I've got this little table. I'm still waiting for some people to put this through some rigorous testing, but at least conceptually, there are people doing it. You have, for different features or different work areas, you identify what are the risk things that you have to knock down, you want to address. You could make these like backlog items. If you're doing Scrum, you could make them product backlog items, right? What are the risk areas we have to knock down? What are the value elements that we want to develop? And very importantly, we call this trim the tail, that long tail that goes out. We want to be able to trim it back. What are some trimmable elements of that feature or that work assignment that we could cut back if we had to? You build this table with certain items down there in the 3 columns, risk, value, tail, and that gives you a map of your project. And then you can go through column order if you want, or you can go through row order if you want, or some diagonal funny thing if you want. But now you have a way of stepping through the project in an interesting way. Okay? So when you get done with all of that, what you get is this nice blue box at the end where the business can decide for business reasons that now is a good time to deploy because you're dealing in the tail area, or they can decide to wait and clean up and shine up and make better certain things before the delivery. All right? So those are the 2 parts that I wanted to talk to you about. Shuharit, everybody should hear, and this disciplined learning idea. It's fairly new, it's aggressive, it's creative, people are doing it, and you should know about it. Okay? So that's the end of the fixed part. Yeah? It's up to you guys now to think of any question you want on any subject. And if I have got a story for you, I'll answer with this, including the story. If I don't have a story for you, then, well, I can't answer the question. Yes, please.
So your previous example with Helsinki and Beijing team, there is one solution that if there are distance, then use pipeline, and another solution that when they are together, then no need for that. Is, on your experience, because you have seen a lot, if you're considering of the distance team who cannot be at the same place, what would be, besides the pipeline solution, what would be, is there any like other ways, methods?
Yeah, distributed development. I mean, we're here in Estonia, everybody's doing distributed development, right? So you guys are distributed. Either you're outsourcing to India or you're being outsourced to by somebody, right? That's the way it is. Sure. The shining example of distributed development is ThoughtWorks, and I'm going to go back like 10 years or 6 years or something like that. And the owner of the company, the founder, is from Sri Lanka. So he understands a lot the cultural issues between the US and India. When he opened up an Indian office, he had to take technical measures. He let the people put in certain technical things I'll tell you about, but he put in certain social measures that are super important. So I'll give you 2 stories about distributed development. That's one, I'll get to that in a moment. The other one is from Motorola, and a guy in the early 2000s was trying to apply something like extreme programming, but with 250 people in like 5 countries, okay? And I asked him, why would you possibly ever want to have 250 people in 5 countries? Because the cost is so high. And he said, because the alternative was to have part-time developers in Chicago. And he decided that if he had part-time developers in Chicago in the same building or the same city, he would never get any of their time and attention. And that was even worse than working across 5 countries. So he got dedicated developers in 5 countries. First thing he did was to bring the team leads, the lead designers, to Chicago for 6 months. So in those 6 months, remember I said it's people, right? They were trying to create a single common view of what they were doing, but not only that of what they were doing, and the technology and the designs, but they also had to come to understand their personalities and their sense of humor. They had to build a very high trust organization, and they did that with, I think, 6 or 8 people, or 10, I don't know, but under 10. A lot of face-to-face co-located. So you always find this as step 1, always. Face-to-face co-location, build the trust, understand the people. Then he sent the people back out, and then they did all the usual things, flying people back, video, phone calls, whatever, but they had to do the first part first, okay? Roy Singham, the CEO of ThoughtWorks, did something else interesting. Normally, if people in the US, and they're also based in Chicago, if they're going to outsource to India, the general view is the smart people are in Chicago, and the beginner people are in India. And there's a class system that's like this. So what he did to invert that was he hired new people in Chicago, and he sent them to India to get trained by experienced Indian developers. Right? So you see the social stuff that he was playing with. So that's what he did on a social basis. And then and then other things with flying people back and stuff. The other thing they did at ThoughtWorks was they instituted continuous integration systems because they wanted that everybody looking at code in Chicago, no matter what time of the day, were looking at the exact same code base as the people in India. So they had some convention. You couldn't check out code for longer than 1 day or 2 days, relatively short time period, because they wanted everybody working off the same code base. So there's some answer for you. And then the usual, lots of Skype and phone and bee-ba-da-ba-dee-ba-dee stuff. Yeah. There's a question. Yes, please.
Do you have any examples of software projects where you would not recommend to use Agile?
Any example of software projects where I would not recommend to use Agile? No.
Whatever.
None.
Chemical, finance.
No. None. What does Agile mean? Agile means 4 things. 1, pay attention to the people and the way they interact together. Is there any project on which I would not want to do this?
There's no.
No. Thank you very much. Second one, pay attention to the feedback from working software in incremental development. Is there any project on which I would not want to do incremental development and get feedback from working software? No. Third, collaborate closely with the customers and end users. Is there any project in which I would not want to collaborate, which would be wiser to not collaborate with? No. Respond to changes in the world, like the fact that Ukraine's in a bad spot and the economy and my lead developer left. No, we got a plan. By God, we're going to stick to the plan. I don't care what's happening in Ukraine, and the EU and Greece and no. No, of course not. Agile means those 4 things. It means nothing else. Nothing else. The definition of Agile is the Agile Manifesto. It says we value individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. Is there any software project where those would not be good things to do? No.
What about aviation stuff, which should be tested thoroughly and quite for a long time?
Ooh, that's very nice. I like this man. Good. Caught me out. No. Very good. Good. You found a place. You found the place. Now, there's a picture I don't have on here. There's a picture I do have on here. Let's see if I can find it. I will in just a second because I will have to show this thing. This man is very good. You get to see all the talk. But I have to get this one picture right here. Okay. And this is the picture. The question was, what about avionics and rockets? And to answer this, I need this picture. What I have on the horizontal axis is the number of people being coordinated. And I've got 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500,000, stuff like that. On the vertical axis, I've got how many people die if something goes wrong. So the bottom is like there's nothing happening, whatever. Second one is simple amounts of money, like your telephone bill. The third one is large amounts of money, things falling down, buildings collapsing, stuff like that, what I call essential monies. And the top one is loss of life. The thing that his question about avionics comes to is the question of how important is this concept of agility in the first place? And if we're going to take NASA and avionics and stuff, we've got people dying if things go wrong, and we have a lot of people to coordinate, so it's over there, more over that way. In that circumstance, and I'll take NASA in particular, in a certain sense, they don't care about this agility at all. Not at all. Not important, because they don't care about the schedule. If people die, that delay it. Okay? There are many circumstances like that, and I would also here take like Nokia putting out a new run of cell phones. They're going to put out however many million cell phones they put out. There's a time period in the project, even for these large projects, during which they want the advantage from the learning. During the time period they want the advantage from the learning, all the agile stuff matters. There's a moment in time where the schedule, that kind of stuff, doesn't matter so much, and less over time. And there's a moment when they go, I don't care about agile. Nobody touches a single line of code until we test this thing like to bejeebers. And at that moment, the prioritization changes. So in the upper right corner, way over past there, agile becomes a mix-in technique for those projects. They would say, at this point in time, it's useful to have these properties.
So like a sub-project, so to say. At a certain stage you use agile and then you don't.
So when you would say, so at the point, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, when you've got 5,000 people and a life-critical system, you want both, right? But at a certain point in time, you want the processes that grow in importance. So processes and tools increase as you go up here. Yep. Documentation increases as you go up here. Contracts increase as you go up here. And your plan will change anyway, sorry, so you still get that one, right? So the first three. So it was really excellent. I'm glad you brought up avionics. You're welcome. Nice. I like it when people chase me down. That was good. Who else in the back? Somebody back there somewhere. Yes, please.
What about if you found that your team communication doesn't work? What do you do in that case? Do you fire people because you have to hire someone again?
No, yeah,
the
question is, what do you do if team communication's not working?
Yeah.
Probably if team communication isn't working, you fire people, you'll hire people, and team communication won't work again. Probably, right? I mean, I don't have any context for the question. So I have to tell a story, right? Somehow he escaped the story on the last. How did I not do a story on the last one? Anyway. So this story has nothing to do with software, but I wrote about the weaknesses of people as being not liking to change and not liking discipline and blah, blah, blah. This was, like 1998 or something. And a nice Norwegian guy by the name of Trygve Reinskau told me the story that down the street there was a little shop that sold buttons and things for sewing and building stuff, glue guns and whatever else. And he said, and the people who worked there were really lazy, and they were disorganized, and they weren't helpful, and it was a horrible shop to go to. And eventually it closed. And in its place opened another store of the same variety. And he said it was wonderful to go into, and the people were helpful, and they were kind and everything. And the only interesting thing is it was the same employees. Different managers, right? So you all know if you were recently a kid in a school, or if you have kids in school, you have the same class of kids and they go to a different teacher and they behave differently, right? Badly behaved here, well behaved here. Super well documented. So if you have communication problems in the team, Probably it's not just that you have the wrong people, but probably there's something going on that needs some work and can be worked on. Probably. So at least I got to tell a story. That's the rule. Now I have to see if I can find a story for this one here. Okay? Let's hear. Thank you.
Should you document, and how much should you document, if at all, and when should you document the system in Agile?
Ooh, now I have to think of a story. I know what the answer I would give you is, but I'm trying to think of what the story would be that would be around it. So the answer is that documentation is an impossible question. Because what you're trying to document is the mental sequence that people went through as they looked at the world at the beginning, and put that in the head of somebody who arrives later on. And the amount of energy you put into creating that picture is like, it's infinitely big to produce. It's arbitrarily large. And you don't have an unbounded amount of time, right? But I'm just trying to find a story. So there's two kinds of documentation. There's the kind that reminds you what you decided earlier. And that's where the proverbial drawing on the napkin makes sense. And there's the kind that acts as a tutorial for the people who come later and were never in the discussions. And people blend those two as though they're the same thing, but they're not at all the same thing. So here's a story of the first one. We were doing some object-oriented design and business modeling. And at that time, the popular thing were these things called CRC cards. They were for object-oriented design, and you'd have a card for every class in your system, for every object, different kind of object in your system. That was a popular technique. And we went through a design session one day in the lunchroom. What happened, though, it's very common with these cards, that when you get moving, you make cards that are similar and you don't write anything on them. But you put them next to each other and everybody understands what they are because they're in the conversation and placing them. So when we got done with this, and we had some number of cards marked and a lot of cards that were blank. We got all done with this and said, that's great, let's do that. And I said, yeah, but there's a couple more people who weren't here. So I got the cards in exactly the same order, like with words and with blank. And I went to the next person quickly while I could remember. And I said, we just had this discussion, and I did a whole movie of the whole thing with the cards. I replayed the cards, including the blank ones, right? And at the end of that, the person, because I had acted it out, I never had to write down what was on the blank cards because it was in the conversation. And then I did that a couple of times during the day. Then all of those people who had been in that conversation could visualize the placement of the cards, and we could refer to the placement of the cards when discussing the design, right? So that was that. If you have new people, we could have, and so this is not a story from the past, we could have videoed that we did this and shown the video to the people, right? So they could see all of the action and the stuff like that. Video is a super good way of documenting these days. So I don't particularly recommend that people spend time writing on the thing. Video is very good at transmitting across a distance. So for example, Jeff Patton, who I quote a lot, was having, and his group in Chicago were having some trouble communicating with the group in India. So they came in and Jeff held his camera up like this, and they had a discussion at the whiteboard. And so Jeff would ask questions and they would change the model on the whiteboard, and then they put it on the server, and then when the people in India came, they could see the discussion as it had happened there. So I don't have the second answer. The problem is this, that it's fundamentally an unbalanced question. No matter how you answer it, you get the wrong answer. So if you don't document, it's wrong. If you document everything, it's wrong. If you document anything in the middle, it's wrong, because it's an over-constrained circumstance. And I'll have to wait. Maybe I'll have a story, maybe I won't. Nice question. Other questions? Any question, any level, any topic, anything?
I have one small question.
Yes, please.
Is your
small finger on the left hand painted red. With a nail.
Yes.
Good.
Why?
There's a story behind that. I just happened to be at a party. Actually, I don't know how to get rid of it now. I don't know what anybody has. I don't know if I even want to get rid of it now. Oh, it was just a party, and there was this lady, and she was pretty unhappy, and she was painting her nails, and she was all kind of sad. So I just said, paint mine.
Yesterday?
No, it was about 3 weeks ago. But if you are having a party where such a thing might happen, I've got another fingernail that needs painting over here.
And the girl, right?
I don't have the girl, so that's very nice question. I'm glad you. And it's really funny how few people even. I don't know if people don't notice or they don't dare to mention it. I've forgotten about it, but it's kind of funny. Why not? Yes, please.
You have experience with government.
No, it's with.
Law tomorrow coming out, so we can fast.
I don't work for governments. By and large, I don't work for government agencies because they move too slowly for me, and my life keep moving fast. And
Do you have any experience?
I do. I can give you 2 little stories from the state of Utah. I was living in Salt Lake City at the time, and so here's an unhappy story and a happy story. And I went in this group. There were 5 people, and they sat next to each other, and they were using Crystal, my staff, and I was going to help them with the retrospective. And they were very afraid about the retrospective, and I said, look, just name anything and just try it for a month. And if you don't like it, take it off the list. Like, who cares? It's just for a month. And then we were talking, and they said, well, we're supposed to do pair programming, but we don't seem to do pair programming. So I said, why don't you? They were being very hesitant. They had trouble suggesting anything, and they were not getting a success. They needed a success. So they said, we have trouble making pair programming work. And I said, why don't you try not doing pair programming? And they said, we're supposed to try to not do pair programming. I said, yes. Write that down and do it for a month, and you'll have a success. See if you can manage to not do pair programming for a month and see if you like it. So they went, yeah, are we allowed to do that? Okay. So they wrote it down, and a month later they were happy because they didn't feel guilty about the fact that they weren't doing pair programming. It was just something they were not supposed to do anymore.
Were they Germans?
Were they Germans, he said. Nice. But the same group had an interesting problem because in Agile we tend to like that people help each other with their jobs. So it happened that the business analyst was going to prototype screens for the developers using Dreamweaver. Anybody know Dreamweaver in here? Yeah, you guys know Dreamweaver. Cool. It turns out that it's against the law for business analysts to use Dreamweaver because Dreamweaver produces legitimate HTML code. And therefore, it's outside of their job description. Did you hear that correctly? So just painting the screen in Dreamweaver and pushing the button, the save button, emits HTML. They were forbidden from doing this because it would be outside of their job description. Legally speaking, they were not allowed to work this way. That's one government thing. The other one was a big government project that was, as usual, it was supposed to be 3 years. It had been 7 years, and it was triple budget and late and all the rest of the stuff. And the head of this project, who's a government person, not a software person, asked me to come in and work with all these bigwigs who were very scared because it was late in the project and they're afraid I was going to threaten them and all kind of stuff. We had this big meeting, and in the end, there were only 2 choices. Either we're going to take this big monster system, get it all completed, and deploy it all at one time. The reason to do this is because they were afraid if they only did part of the system, their funding would be cut. And therefore, they wanted to keep getting all the funds until they had everything ready, and then they would deploy it all at one time. She was new in her office as the Secretary of Welfare or something like that for the state of Utah. And I said to her, can you imagine what is going to happen to all of your offices on, let's say, May 1st when they deploy the system? all of your offices will shut down instantly, and everybody will be calling the helpline, and you won't be able to move for 2 weeks. The alternative is a staged deployment where you take the risk of the funding cut, but you deploy little pieces out. It's the learning, right, that we had before. They were going to do the big learning at the end, and I said at least deploy in stages so you control the damage of when you deploy a piece and things break and stuff happens. So she said, okay, thank you. She deployed in stages. It was okay.
They have developed it in that one piece.
It's a standard government thing that they're afraid that the government will cut the funding, so they show no results until they have everything, and then they go like that.
But they have pieces like models. They could.
Well, she just told them to like roll this part out now and then roll this part out now. She asked them, she was a boss, right? So she could say she wanted these capabilities out, you know, each 2 months them to add. So she could give them that kind of instruction, and then they would do that. So she was very happy with this idea of stage delivery. That's all I'm going to say about government. That's all I've got. Another question? Any questions? Yes, please, here.
I was recently asked to quantify the success of the Scrum implementation. So how successful are we? How are we doing better than we did before? And I couldn't find answers.
No, it's very difficult. And the question is, I was asked to quantify the benefits of using Scrum. And I typically totally avoid that question at all. It doesn't interest me. I'm not in the position of needing the information or anything, so I don't touch it. I read the literature. There's a number of experience reports from people that are CMMI level 5. There's a company called Symantec in Denmark that's published some numbers. Sabre published some numbers. There's a bank in the US that published some numbers. That's fine. They do whatever they do. The problem is, for me, and I talk to people who have your same assignment, what is the baseline that you're comparing against? So if they didn't have a way of seeing how good they were before, how can you show that it's better because you don't have a baseline? So it's an unfair question. For me, I don't live in the world like that. I have seen numbers that, 15% better, or if you look at Jeff Sutherland's numbers, it's 7,000% better or something weird like that. All I know is I talk to executives and they say, we would never go back. Never go back is not 15%. People don't say that. No, I would not step foot in that environment again now that I've got this. So I live for those people. That's what I have.
You can count those people.
Yeah. Another question? Anybody else? Way in the back.
My question is, what is the next Agile? People are always seeking the silver bullet, waterfall, then it was Agile. What's next?
Yeah, what is the next Agile? For me, Agile is interesting because it's only the second time in history that people actually ask the question, how do we do better? What are we doing? The first time was in 1968. NATO funded a conference. You guys have heard of the NATO conference on software engineering? Anybody heard of that? Some older people, younger people, well-read people. It was interesting. It's online. You can read it. And it says right in the preface that it was coined as a provocative term. Do you know what that means, provocative term? It means that they didn't understand the word software engineering. They wanted to provoke a response. So they said, hey, how about we call what we do engineering, right? And let's see what happens. And it says that right in the preface. So they had a conference and they said, let's all be software engineers. And by the way, we're really bad at this. So you can imagine this in 1968. They said, hi, to the rest of the engineering community. This is where software engineering comes from. Hi, everybody else in the engineering community, we've just joined your community and we're really bad. What kind of that? What is that? You read, but you can read it online. It's superb. And you read very carefully what the people do or did not match what they recommended. So they tell you what they think engineering was or is, and it's wrong. It's not engineering. Then they made some recommendations, which are bad recommendations. Then they talked about what they actually did, which didn't match their bad recommendations, but more closely matched what we call Agile. So very interesting. So after that, then 68, 69, and all software engineering went like that. So in 2001, as far as I'm concerned, is the only second time in history where people thoughtfully got together and examined what is the nature of what we're doing. So it's only the second time, so 1968 and 2001. Seems to be working pretty well. From 2001 till 2014, we've got 13 years. Generally, the world seems to be operating better off of this thing. What comes after? I don't know. It's interesting now when I look at the people in the audience. There are an increasing number of people in the world who've never worked in any fashion except Agile. And when I talk to them, they don't have anything to relate to about the alternative to Agile. So it'll be interesting to see what, let's say, 10 years from now, someone gets tired about something and comes up with something else. But what that is, I couldn't say. Right now, we're still living off of a fairly solid set of foundations. We had a question down here, yeah?
Yeah, I guess I'm looking for a story there. Is it possible to teach Agile in a lecture mode without training?
Is it possible to teach Agile in a lecture mode?
Yeah.
I don't see how to find a story. The answer is no, as far as I can tell.
Of universities that are used to kind of just teach something or just go read something without doing.
No, but the story I would give you is that in 2006, I created a software engineering course for the universities in Utah. And the interesting assignment inside of that was how to do incremental development inside of the course itself. If you believe in incremental development, then every student course should be done with incremental development. But in fact, if you look at the assignments that are given to students, none of them are incremental in development. And the problem with the software engineering with incremental development is you have to give the assignment before you've gone through the steps. So the course was designed in a spiral fashion, so it would revisit requirements. So just enough requirements to start to give an assignment, right? Just enough of everything. So you had time to give a 2-month assignment or 8 or 10-week assignment, in which there had to be multiple deliveries, but the lectures kept going on while the people were working. So it was very interesting to construct a course of that form. And so the course was spiraled. Every assignment had multiple increments and deliveries. Every lecture had a social working assignment with assignment to reflect and describe what happened in, and a social working assignment outside as homework, and the people had to write what they observed and what they felt, so self-awareness was in there, and then incremental development of everything inside of it and so on. So it has been done. So I don't consider a university environment to be lecture only. To me, you've got social assignments in the class, you've got technical assignments outside the class, you've got reflective activity between the classes, and you have incremental development inside of every assignment. So that has been done, and it's somewhere on my hard disk. If you want it, I can just give it to you. So contact me after. All right, it's after 7 o'clock. I'll take one more if anybody's got one more question. I think that's a yes, please, in the back.
Hi. The question would be, as far as I understand, there wouldn't be a set way to react to changes. I'm talking about the last time. React to changes around you that affect your business in any way. But what's the optimal way to find a period of time when you must react to this, this, and this? It wouldn't take too long to move too fast to lose your focus on the most important things. Thank you.
I may ask you, because the voice was quite soft, what's an optimal length of time to react to the business?
Let's say how to find this optimal.
I don't know that there is an optimal length of time. So all of the contexts are different. So for example, I used to work with fixed price projects. We used Agile on fixed price. It works really great. The requirements just don't change. It's wonderful. It's like Let's take an ordinary project and make it simpler because the requirements aren't going to change. It works really great. Now, what's the optimal moment for, no, it's a fixed price project. The requirements aren't going to change. Or there's contractual junk that makes it change, right?
Well,
That's,
I'm a project manager.
sorry?
I am a project manager. I deal with it myself. But
Yeah.
if something changes, I need to think how much time I'm going to spend on this, not to lose focus on the most important thing.
Yeah. That's a really great, it's an art form, right? You're, as a project manager, you're walking across this very strange bridge in this cliff thing, right? And wind is blowing on you and all that kind of metaphoric stuff, right? So there's no possible answer to this because it's in fact your assignment to make that answer. Like how long can we delay this before that hurts us, right? But you might engage the team, or you might, you might take hallucinatory drugs, or you might do whatever you do. You get these ideas from somewhere, but no, there's no possible, at least I don't know of any. So sorry about that. All right, this has been more than an hour. Thank you very much, everybody. See you around.